Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
Good afternoon. Welcome to In Session. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next 2 hours here on Radio Hamra. Today, I want to talk about a topic that is not so important, but can feel important. And even that itself is part of the discussion. But I want to talk about sports and being a sports fan. And even as I say that, and this relates to the theme in general, there are obviously much more important things going on in the world and much more important things to talk about. And on different shows, I'll talk about different things. But today, with the World Cup ending this past weekend, I thought it could be a fun topic to discuss being a sports fan, the experience of it, why it would impact us so much, why we can feel so good and so bad, care so much about it, and some different psychological perspectives, theories, and some of my own thoughts about this part of life, sports. And full disclosure, I'm a big sports fan myself and have been since I was very, very young. Some of my, I think, most intense memories from childhood come from watching sports, specifically the Lakers as a kid. Basketball and Lakers were kind of like life, for me and my brother Powell. We would just be obsessed with it, watching, talking about it, the next game. And, this is obviously way before the internet. So, information was harder to come by. So we try to find ways to learn more, have a schedule printed out, or not even printed out, but find it somehow. Sometimes we'd receive something at the beginning of the year, then we had all the games on it. So it was everything. And so I remember feeling a very deep connection to it, getting immersed in it, the excitement, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, all of that from an early age. And that's really continued my whole life. I still really enjoy watching sports, different sports, but it's not just basketball anymore. Even soccer has become probably more my favorite sport in recent years, and still can get very impacted by it. But even I've noticed changes in that, how much and in what ways, and maybe at different times how it could impact me and probably anyone out there more or less, depending on things going on in our life. And also, full disclosure, I'm a big fan of Messi. I've shared on the air before. He's one of my favorite athletes of all time, definitely my favorite soccer player, and I've been following him and rooting for him for, I think, maybe 15 years or so. So I was and still disappointed what happened Sunday at the World Cup final. I think Spain were the better team, but you always want your player, your team to win. So it always hurts. And now, maybe 5 days afterwards, truth be told, I still feel a little bit sad about it. I don't feel great. It takes time to process. And that's kind of the interesting thing, or I find it interesting, how much we can care about something. And this is, in this case, not even the country that I'm associated with, but this player that I've grown fond of and attached to and connected to. And now, what happens to him feels like it impacts me. And that's some of the stuff I've heard, people say, like, oh, do you make the money that, people like this kind of jokes when someone gets sad or gets happy, like, oh, why are you happy? Do you get money, or do you get something? Or do you, do you think they care if they win or they lose for you, or, different things like that. And I'm definitely not here to argue that sometimes, even myself included, people might not care too much, or it could be, extreme. That definitely happens. So it's not to say anything people experience when it comes to sports is good or healthy or normal or natural or anything like that. Maybe natural, there's some parts of it that are, some of which I'll probably touch on. But, this is just a thing. We see the passion. If you're watching the World Cup, you see players, of course, but even fans, crying, or, being so happy when their team wins, or having a moment, or just the intensity of the ups and downs and how much they affect people while they're watching the game, a game they're not even playing. So there's lots of different research that's been done, lots of different theories on on sports fans and in general. And one of the theories, or one of the main ones that comes up, is social identity theory, which essentially means, we start to identify with the team that we follow. And if you've been a sports fan, you can maybe at times trace back your process of identifying and connecting more with the team. So for me and my brother with the Lakers, I think I was like about 4 or 5 when we first started getting into watching games, and I can't remember exactly the process, and I was so young, but very soon it became like our team. That was us. We were cheering for them, and we felt connected to them. Even with my brother and my cousins, we'd each be one of the players, and like we'd always be the same one. Like my brother was always, I don't know, always Magic. He got first pick, being the oldest, and we'd always be that player. So we really did identify with the team, with the players, and it felt part of ourselves. It wasn't like we're cheering for something outside of us. It really felt like we were winning and we were losing. So we could strongly start to identify, and part of our identity could start to get connected to this team. So that's why it's called social identity theory. You don't just feel like you're cheering for someone else. It does become a we. And we even see this in how people talk about the team, right? So they'll say, "Oh yeah, we won," or "Oh, we did great," or we needed to play harder," or "The referees were against us." It creates this us versus them, but we connect very strongly with our teams over time. And just from a human perspective, we are, tribal, and we have an us versus them that is part of our psychology and psyche that makes sense when you consider, yes, I think most of us would like for the world and everyone to get along, and for there to be peace and cooperation and all of that. That's the goal and desire. But even still, it's not that way. And we can understand throughout human history, there was always a sense of competition for resources, for land, for whatever it might be. There's been these us versus them has been there. Who's part of our group? Who's out of our group? Who can I trust and rely on, and we take care of each other? Who's outside of that and might be against me, and even maybe wants to even kill me? So when we talk about social identity theory, our identity can have lots of different aspects and components to it. And it also could include this part of understanding who am I and who is us and who are the others. So who are the ones I like and are with me, and I want to win, and I want to win with them and take care of them, and they take care of me, and who are the people outside of us we might have to even be careful about or protect ourselves from, because they're not on our side, they're not with us. And so it could make sense that we align with a team and connect with them. And sports in general, even just not just someone being a sports fan, a lot of people even say sports could be a good way to express some of the more aggressive impulses of humans and groups and all that. That we try to, we win against each other. It's kind of like war. You defeat each other. Someone wins, someone loses. There could be even some of the wording, kill the other team, or beat them, or things like that might include something uh, connected to that or related to that. So sports might even reflect this ability or way to have competition in a more healthy, it doesn't always stay healthy, but a healthier way, or a way that doesn't have to be life or death or involve killing one another, and expressing that aggression or competition in that way. I mentioned things like saying we, and they've even done research looking at fans and how much, what kind of wording they use talking about their team. And something that was consistently found is that when people are talking about when their team won, the team that they're a fan of, connected to, or if they're, the nation or a university team, whatever it might be, they'll use the word we more when the team won. Oh yeah, we were so good, or we beat them so bad, or we were so much better, or we won by 12 points, or whatever it is. The word we will come up more when they're talking about a victory. They want to align with it, connect with it. However, when the team lost, often they would distance themselves, and no longer it was we, it was they. Oh yeah, they played so bad. or they just couldn't get it going today, or they suck, they're not good at all. But there's this way of using that language to distance ourselves from the team when they lose. Not a great. It doesn't really show a lot of loyalty, but it just shows how much we are yearning. Something I also think is important related to this theme, to feel good about ourselves, feel good about our group, feel good about our identity, going back to that social identity, or even our self-worth. So, when there's a win, we like to feel part of that and be a winner and feel like a winner. When there's a loss, it could be harder to internalize and make it part of ourselves. So we'd rather distance ourselves. They won. I wasn't playing. They lost today. They didn't play good today. Whereas we won when the team is victorious, which is interesting. They found a lot of research like that. Related research to that, there's a concept called basking in reflected glory, where they did research on college campuses, and they found that on the Mondays after the football team won a game, which was usually on Saturdays, you would see more students wearing sweatshirts of the school on the Monday after they won. Whereas when they lost, compared to when they lost. So if you just looked at how much they were wanting to be part of it, representing it, and wearing the school colors, there was more of that after the team won. And so this was interpreted as meaning like we want to be connected to the win more. We want to bask in this reflected glory, as the term or the concept is described, be part of the win. And you see this when a team wins or is winning, you'll see more of people wearing their shirts and things like that. I actually always thought, I remember one time being at UCLA and the Lakers lost a really important game in the finals, and I showed up wearing my Lakers shirt, and so I was like, dude, what are you doing? Wearing, Lakers lost. And I kind of thought then, and I said it, the sense of, to me, that's actually when you show your loyalty or your pride or your support, is that when the team loses, it's easy to want to be part of a team when they win, and be, again, basking in that reflected glory and feeling like, you're good and strong and part of them. But the true side, I think, of a fan, the loyalty lies when a team isn't doing well, to stick by them, to support them, as it is with people in our lives, when they're doing well, or they have, gotten something that maybe we could even use or get some benefit from. It's easy to support them then. But when it matters the most and when people need it the most is when they're struggling, when things don't go well, when they lose the job rather than to get the promotion, to be there to support them rather than just to celebrate with them, or, to get that. So I always thought that was an interesting thing, that I know it makes sense to wear the team shirt or colors after they win, but I think the support really comes when the team loses, to show that you're there through thick and thin and you'll support them. And I was wearing my Messi jersey a few days ago when I was out, just as a sign of support. But I think that's an interesting thing. But there's a lot of this research showing that people tend to, and I can get that, represent the colors or wear the colors more when the team wins rather than when they lose. And so going back to this idea of identity, what we can think about is, I know I was talking about this us, them, we, we're using them or they when we're talking about the team. But there is this sense when we really connect to a team, we do feel like it's us, like we are part of it. And so that's why it's so significant. That's why it feels so passionate or intense. You're not just cheering for some players on the field, you are part of that. You connect to that. And that could feel like a whole lot. Now, if you look at the World Cup, this obviously gets amplified by them being representing the countries. And so if this is your national heritage, you will feel even more connected to it. You can feel even stronger sense of pride. Identity is, for a lot of people, their country of origin is a big part of their identity. I am Iranian, I am Argentinian, I'm Spanish, I am Danish, whatever it is. And so we feel a strong connection to that country of origin. So, it could make sense as us versus them. We, it feels like your nation. And although it's just, let's say a soccer game or, some kind of sports match, and you could see like, well, what's the big deal? It could feel like this sense of pride and how it represents you, or your status is being elevated. In some ways within the sport it is, but as far as the external world and life, nothing changes, but it can feel that way. And so to me, concluding this first segment, two major themes psychologically. I talked about like the team group, us versus them, which is a big part of it. And belonging to a team. We're so needing and wanting to be part of a group or a tribe or be part of that. And so even it can feel very good to be a sports fan and affiliated with the sports team for those reasons. But another thing I think we're constantly seeking as humans is either kind of trying to run away from a feeling of inferiority or less than. And because of that, seeking some feeling of being good or better than. So when we win, it feels good because we get to connect to that or feel a little bit better than others. So if our country wins, it could feel like this sense of, oh, we're better than other countries. And therefore, I am better than the people from those countries because I'm part of this country. We do this even when we talk about our culture. Iranians will talk about Persian poets or people throughout history and in some way thinking that because we are part of that culture and we have these great giants in the past, that makes you better, which I don't think it does. But you hear that as a way of trying to bring ourselves up. And so I'll continue on these themes and more about just being a sports fan and that experience and some of the psychology of it after the break and throughout the show. Let's go to our first commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Continuing the discussion on sports fandom, being a sports fan, why we can feel so much watching a team, other people play a game. It could feel like we are winning or losing, and the win and loss is just not about a game. It could feel like almost life and death, because so significant, so important. As I mentioned, I'm still reeling from last weekend's final where I was hoping Messi would win, but he did not. And it still leaves me sad every time I think about it. It makes me a little bit sad. So I firsthand have definitely experienced these ups and downs of being a sports fan and how much it can impact you. And again, it can almost feel funny, especially the outside, even to myself. So as I'm shocked at how much I could feel about it. But I think some of the things I've talked about already can give us some idea of why we might feel so much. Because when we cheer for a team or a player, but we're not just cheering for them. In some ways, it feels like it's us on the field. It's us that wins or loses. And that's why the stakes can feel so high, especially when the game is an important game, a close game, an intense game, one with a rival. You can feel it even more. So, talking about the social identity theory and some things related about that. Just to give a sense of how much we get impacted by watching the game and we think, oh, it's just in our head or it's something. And I always think that's funny when people say something is in our head because, yes, everything happens in our head. I think people say that to me like you can control it somehow because it's in your head, but that's not the case. Of course, we can influence things that we think and feel, but we can't just control what we think and feel. And so, yes, everything happens in our head. Love feels good. That's happening in your head. Some heartbreak feels bad. That happens in your head. And of course, then in our body as well. But it's all there. But we're showing this like the physiological experience of winning and losing. There's been some research looking at testosterone, so primarily this research was done on men. But looking at testosterone levels in winners and losers. And first, I think it was done in tennis. And I think I read a study in chess, but so I was looking at athletes playing and then measuring I don't know if they did it through blood, saliva, how they did the measurements, but nonetheless, they found that the winners saw a spike in testosterone and the losers often saw a dip in testosterone. So, and this can make sense because when you win, that can be related to status, of course. Sometimes when you win, it's like a war. When you win, you get the victory, or you might get more access to even mates or resources or things like that. And so it can make sense. The brain's almost going into this place of winning and status. And when you lose, you almost like you have to lower yourself. Your status has been lowered, so you might have to be prepared to not seek something. And so I think the early research was done on actual participants, but then they did research looking at fans who were really devoted, and they found the same pattern that, when the team won, their testosterone often increased also. their confidence might have gone up, the mood would improve, and they could feel more dominant, more kind of sense of pride and power in a way. So it's interesting, not just the players on the field, but the fans were impacted after the game, that they felt that way. And if you are a sports fan, obviously I can't measure my own testosterone levels, but I've experienced this when the team wins. There's, of course, feelings of like happiness and euphoria, but you just feel really strong and good. And when your team loses, you can feel dejected and down and low, even on yourself, just like not feel very good. As I was saying, every time I think about it, I get a little bit sad and down. And, it's impacted me in that way. And similarly, when they had won earlier, Messi had won some big games, I felt really happy and felt some of those things. So it was interesting to see that there's research showing that even biologically, we could find these clear markers, these clear signs that we get impacted. And also it shows again that identity, that you are having a similar internal experience to the players who are on the field, which we can say, well, they're the ones moving and running, and so we might think changes happen in their bodies, but you experience that too, in a way. And that's why also you'll feel the stress. Sometimes I think as a fan, you might feel some of the stress more because particularly what I was just talking about, the players at least gets to move and run and make movements where they get to then release some of those chemicals or move body or move things through the body, through their bloodstream. But as a fan, you're often just sitting there, maybe just standing still, watching, and sometimes even not watching. You've seen when people say, I can't watch, they just can't handle the anticipation of seeing what is going to happen, good or bad, especially on something like, let's say, a penalty kick or a free throw at the end of the game. You just can feel like it's too hard to watch. Just shows how intensely we're impacted and affected by what's happening, the outcome, that it can be even hard to watch what is happening and, rather look away than to actually look at it. So we see these physiological factors in play that are your testosterone goes up, and when you're watching the game, your cortisol will definitely spike and go up when you really care about what is going on. So often this research looks at, obviously the devoted fans that don't care as much. Obviously, they won't be as impacted. You would expect that, but when they care a lot, that you feel that impact. But what I've noticed is a way of measuring or trying to determine if someone is really a big fan is not looking at how happy they get when the team wins. I mean, that's something, there's something to look at there. But for me, a bigger determinant or a bigger way of knowing someone's really a big fan is how sad they get when the team loses. And all of these things are internal. So people can try to show something, and we see that a lot when the team wins. People are celebrating that, they might not even care, but they're just having fun and all that. And maybe when they lose, someone's just trying to get attention and might pretend like they're very sad. But I think, when a team wins, if you're, visiting somewhere and there's a parade and everyone's celebrating, it's fun to be part of a celebration. So you might let yourself kind of feel good or have fun with and get taken, away by the excitement of what's going on. But what I've noticed even in myself is when I know I really care about a team or players, like when they lose, you feel it because you can't shake it. Because if you don't really care, you just stop caring. You wouldn't let yourself internally feel bad, and get down about something. You're just like, I don't really care. Like that's, I barely watch them play. And you just will going back to the distancing ourselves from the losses, but just really you won't care that much. But when you really connect and identify with a team, you can't do that. You can't just turn it off and say, I don't care, because you do care. And so I felt that with teams that I got connected to later in life, where I was getting, into their games and following them and starting to identify with them, that what I really realized I was a fan or connected to the team was when I felt the losses deeply and I couldn't shake that feeling. I couldn't just turn it off or not care. And I would have the feeling, kind of like I was saying with the final this past Sunday, where anytime I would think about it, I kind of get this like bad feeling, this like bad taste in my mouth, like that happened, that was the result. And that's when I realized, I really do care, because before I could kind of shake the loss and not think about it and feel like it's them, it's not me, it's not an us, but now it does feel like us. So it's an interesting way. Identity is not some black and white thing. It's not something that we can just turn off and on. It tends to be a process, or it evolves over time. And so if you ever become a fan of a team, you probably have experienced this. It's interesting seeing yourself get more connected, more invested, feeling things more over time. And then, as I was saying, to me, you'll realize that when the team loses, when things go bad, it's even harder for you to shake it than before. You can't just turn that off and on. And, there you go, having that feeling. Now, I think looking at myself and my own life and looking at people in general, there's some themes of how much we get impacted, how much we feel things. And one thing that comes to my mind is how much or how we're feeling in our life in general, and how full our life is or what else is going on. Because when I was a young kid, I would just go to school and, life is pretty simple when you're a kid. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple in a lot of ways. And so I really cared about the Lakers and not much else. I had school and life and family and the friends, there's some of that going on. But as far as like, responsibilities and major things go on in life, there wasn't much. So much of my life just revolved around whether the Lakers winning or losing. That was kind of like everything. I had just that. As I got older, and I cared a lot still, and I still can care a lot about sports. Sports teams, I have noticed changes as life gets more full. Other things become important. That at times the feeling can at least change, if not just completely diminish, but it can change or get less, I would say, over time based on what else is going on in your life. It's kind of like anything when something goes wrong in one aspect of life, how strong we feel or how strong we are, the other aspects of life can serve as a cushion for that. So, you go through a breakup, but you have good family, so you have those kind of social connections, feel good about your career, feel good about other parts of your life. It doesn't mean it'll make it easy, but maybe less hard to go through that breakup. But you go through that same breakup and you're financially struggling and you don't feel so close to family or any other friends, your work is not going well. That breakup will hurt even more, or you'll just be hurt even more. So it'll be harder for you. You won't have as many psychological resources to handle that loss or that setback. So and it's kind of makes sense. So we have more of a cushion, more good things going on in our life. We can handle more, take on more. Kind of using a more day-to-day example, it's like when you don't have enough sleep and things impact you more emotionally. You have a harder time regulating yourself, or the good will also feel more good, but the bad will also feel more bad. It'll be harder for you to handle things, or you're more irritable. So I think that's just like true about life. And so as a sports fan, I've noticed this too. When things are going bad in life, or struggling with something else, I might feel even more like I need this win. Sometimes I need to win one. There's this stronger feeling of wanting to feel good, or wanting to feel good about yourself or something you're connected to. And it would be harder to have a setback at that time. So I've noticed that if I look at the course of my life and what was going on in other aspects of my life, both bigger, like, overall, and also more short term, if you just go through like a breakup or a hard time or something else happens, how much more you might feel like you need that win, and how much harder it can be to take the burden of the loss at that point. Because again, you connect to it in a way that it feels like okay, at least I'm winning here. It might even sound delusional. It might sound kind of crazy to think that, okay, if your favorite basketball team wins, somehow you are winning in a way, because that way you're not. But I think it does show the power of our social identities and how much we can connect to something to the point where it does feel like it's us. We are winning or losing here. Kind of also reminds me, going back to the analogy or the connection with war and that kind of competition or battle. It can feel like that when your country wins in a war. It does have tangible benefits to your life, and if they lose, it does have tangible costs to your life, depending on how extreme they are, depending on the war. And so many situations, but there is something really real there. So when his competition is involved, you can feel the strong connection to the wins and losses, and it brings up something. So it's something to just look at yourself when if you do care about sports, follow sports, you probably will notice some of these patterns that when things are better in your life, you might get happy or sad about the wins or losses, but you might feel less impacted. And if you're going through a hard time, you might feel even more like you really need the win, or the losses will sting a little more deeply because you don't have that cushion to fall back on, or the rest of life might not be feeling so good. And so it leaves you feeling, a bit bad, or not feeling good about things. So I'll continue on some of these themes related to being a fan, why we might care so much, maybe too much. That's up for debate, but why we might care so much about watching some players or team play a game. Let's go to another commercial break. We'll be right back. Back, continuing the discussion on the experience of sports fans, psychology of being a sports fan. I wanted to share a concept that comes from sociologist Emil Durkheim called collective effervescence. And this is this concept he described of the heightened emotional energy, the kind of feeling of unity, connection, and even this transcendence that we can feel when we are in large groups participating in something together. It could be a kind of like a ritual or event. So, maybe think a concert, could be some kind of like, let's say even a church or religious type of a ritual, but also could include something like a sporting event would be like this too. So collective effervescence. And maybe you have had this experience yourself. You're in a group and everyone's singing the same song together, and it just feels amazing. Something that you wouldn't feel if you were just singing the song by yourself alone. Something that involves this the collective, the group, so being part of something. And I've definitely experienced this many times, and I really enjoy this experience. And people can also different how easy it is or how prone they are to get caught up in collective effervescence and how good it feels and or how much they feel it. So we're not all necessarily the same in that, because some people don't really care for concerts or sporting events, don't really do a lot for them. They might be slightly enjoyable, but not too much. Whereas for other people, it could feel like an incredible experience, something they would seek out. I would definitely put myself in that second camp. I really enjoy, just love being part of going to concerts, but also especially sporting events and feeling that intensity and the group connection, the collective all coming together. Especially, you go to soccer games and they'll sing songs and chants, and there's like really this powerful feeling. So, what are some factors that might differentiate people? Well, people who are more extroverted often will be more likely to enjoy group experiences. So that kind of makes sense. People who are more prone to introversion, they tend to prefer smaller, either groups or even one-to-one or alone time much more. And an extrovert will be more likely to enjoy the group, the larger group and social and bigger things like that. So that makes sense. Another one, part of personality that relates to how much we would enjoy something like, let's say, being a sporting event and enjoying the sense of collective effervescence, is our openness to experience. So some people are just more likely to look for newer experiences, or are more likely to feel like an experience is very exciting and intense in a positive way. And so obviously those people are going to be more likely to want to seek them out or feel something when they're there. Another aspect is how, we call it empathy, or kind of how much we feel other people's feelings. Some people it's easier for them to kind of get lost in the group feeling. And for some people, it's not as easy. They might not feel it. And these things, all of them, none of them are all good or bad. So it's not good to be extroverted or bad to be extroverted. These are all personality types of characteristics or traits. We all tend to have both aspects. We're not just extroverted or introverted. We can have both, but we might lean more one way or have more more tendencies in certain ways. But here as well. So it's not that you should have the ability to just feel everyone's feelings. That can also be bad, because you can lose your sense of self or your own ability to think and feel for yourself, depending on how much. We've also seen, mass hysteria when people are in groups and they can act really badly too. So the collective, it's not just a good, beautiful, positive feeling. It can really intensify feelings overall and reactions. And at times people do things they never could have imagined when they're part of a group. They get lost in that group energy. So some people are better at, you can look at it that way too, of kind of being within themselves and holding on to their own feelings and not getting caught up by everyone else's emotions around them. So that's not all a bad thing. But there are others that are more likely to get caught up in the whole experience of what's going on, their empathy and their ability to feel others' feelings or feel what the group is feeling allows them to then get lost in this collective effervescence. So not everyone will be the same in that. So as I'm talking about this, you can think about yourself: how much do you enjoy going to sporting events? How lost you get in it? How much you enjoy that? And some people might say, "Oh, I would never." They might feel like it's a joke to get so connected or feel so much things that are going on around you, or to be at a game, and that's part of their personality. They might almost not want to lose themselves, and I could see, as I said, benefits to that. I can also see benefits in allowing yourself to be part of a group, being part of something bigger. Even, let's say, if you're chanting, I've thought about this before, so and I think, oh, why should I say what everyone else is saying? I should just say what I want to say. But you get to create something beautiful when you all sing together, chant together. That yes, you have to in that way lose your sense of self to a degree to be part of that group, and even lose your sense of being able to say something for yourself or choose what you say. But you get to be part of a collective, be part of a group, and I think that's a trade-off that we actually experience in society in general. That to function in society, we do have to be willing to relinquish some things or some parts of ourselves, at least at some times, just to be part of the group, part of that society or the bigger group. So some people are more likely to just have this connection. Also, we can call it emotional contagion. It's kind of related to empathy in a way that some people, we could say, feel other people's feelings, or they might catch the group's feelings more than others. And so good and bad again here, we could see that where it could be good, you're sensitive to what's going on around you, you can kind of read the room and read the vibe and feel the vibe even. But the bad could be you can get lost in it or not have your own sense of self there, or your own sense of evaluating what is going on, whereas someone else might be better at keeping that perspective or keeping the awareness of what they feel and not just get caught up in the moment or get caught up in what is happening. So people who have stronger or more prone to emotional contagion, we can understand that if they are in a group, kind of like a concert or a sporting event, they can get more lost and caught up in the collective effervescence. Another characteristic that could play a part here is how strongly we have a need to belong. So there could be some sense of wanting to connect, wanting to be part of something if you might feel disconnected, or in general want to regularly feel connected. So again, someone else might not want that or need that as much, and they show up and they might not get as lost in it. And it could be good and bad, but the good of it could be that they can hold on to their sense of self or not have that need to belong. Maybe they'll belong when they want to or let themselves, but they won't have a strong need. Whereas others might want to just connect and be part of it so strongly that they'll want that type of feeling of social connection or being part of that group. So again, none of these things are all good or all bad, but I've definitely experienced so many beautiful experiences because of this type of collective effervescence of just being part of the crowd and being lost in it, and even experiencing a sense of awe. So as when you see a huge group of people and they're all chanting the same way or cheering at the same time or experiencing something together, it could be a really amazing experience, really awe-inspiring, where you just feel some sense of just connecting to something bigger than yourself, or getting lost in that. So to me, that's an interesting thing, and why I think some people, I can get it that if you, well, let's say just on like sports in general, like watching the games, which many people don't, you might not enjoy going to a game, and if you also don't enjoy the crowd or the group or don't get as lost in it, it might be even annoying or not enjoyable to be at the game. And even some people that like sports would rather watch it at home than be at the game because they don't get caught up in all of this, or for them these things aren't as enjoyable, and they might even say, well, I can watch it more easily at home and just go to the bathroom or get food or do whatever I want comfortably in my own house. I'd almost rather do that than to go to a game and have to figure out how to get there, whether it's parking or transportation of whatever kind, walking there, finding the seats, being in the discomfort of being in a group around people, or maybe it's hot or it's cold or whatever it is. And so I can get that. I don't feel that way. I've been in games where it's been freezing cold, or it's been very hot, or it's been raining. I don't know about snowing quite yet, but almost freezing temperatures so close. It would have been snowing if there was precipitation. I've been in all sorts of games. To me, it's great. It's fun. It's part of the experience. But I can totally get how for someone it would not be enjoyable. They would even if they didn't have to pay, they wouldn't want to go, or they were being paid. They'd rather just be at home and watching the game. So I think it's an interesting concept. This idea of collective effervescence, because you do see these intense experiences, and something that's in general the case. If you're not experiencing something, things can seem bizarre, and it's easier for us to judge because you just want to see fans at a game acting in a certain way. And you can be like, well, why are they caring so much, or why are they getting so into it, or why do they react like that? And of course, the people at the game are likely to care more. They went, they put the effort to go to the game, but also being part of the group, it affects us in ways that it probably won't do something we did if we're on our own. So you might watch the game and react intensely, but if you're at the game and are surrounded by fans who are also reacting strongly, it might bring out something even stronger in you. And so, as I was saying, this is not all good. It could be bad too. People can act in really horrible ways. So we see that in so many games, sporting events, with like fights between fans, really even hurting and even killing each other, that bad. Destroying things, doing bad things. So the group, it's not just, it just amplifies things. It doesn't mean it just makes things better. Sometimes things can be bad or worse, or, some bad things can happen as well. So as I shared, I have always enjoyed going to the games. I'd say concerts too, but sporting events, it's just, if I could do anything, that's like my favorite thing to do, is to have that kind of experience of just being in a group, being with the crowd, experiencing that, hearing the roar, the energy, singing the songs. I've even been watching a lot of chants of different countries during this World Cup. The Viking Row of Norway became very famous. I'm sure you saw it if you even were casually watching the World Cup, that the fans of Norway would do kind of this row all in unison, and people all over the world have been doing it too. And so it can be fun to get lost in that and be part of something like that. And I think that's been something nice too about the World Cup. Of course, it's about competition and winning and losing, us versus them, this country versus that country. But something I usually enjoy about the World Cup, and definitely saw it this time as well, is that you see a lot of people coming together too. And you saw a lot of course, the players doing sportsman-like things with one another, and some unsportsman-like ones as well, but sportsman-like things, and let's say consoling each other when one team loses and the other one wins, rather than just celebrating with their team. Going to console the losing team, of course, like jersey swaps and just exchanging pleasantries, things like that sort. But then also with the fans, seeing fans of different countries. Of course, they're competing and they want to win and they want their country to win. But whether it was before, during, or after the game, seeing different types of interactions between the fans that were quite beautiful and touching and showing the side of unity. So turning down the volume of the us versus them and making it that we're all us. So we might come together to root for our teams, root for our countries, but we don't have to be against each other in a deeper way. It can just be about the game itself. Yes, within the game, we can compete and try to win and want to win, but there's something much bigger than the game, which is life itself. And there we can treat each other with love and respect, and we should. I think that's something that sports can do, is hopefully bring people together in a positive way. In the spirit of competition, I don't want to just say friendly competition, like people don't care, but in the spirit of a controlled competition. So it's within the framework of the game and trying to win, but then outside of that, we don't have to compete or be against each other. So I think that is a way that sports could be good, bringing people together, then also allowing for a sense of competition on the field. That could replace or take away as much of this need for competition in general or outside of that. But that's just some thoughts on that. Now, after the break, I wanted to talk a bit about how we pick our teams or players. Of course, sometimes it's just the country you were born in, so you're a fan of them, or the city you were born in. Sometimes it's something we learn from parents or people in our family, but just some thoughts on how we kind of pick a team or some things related to those ideas. So let's go to another commercial break. We'll be right back. So I mentioned before the break, I want to talk a bit about how people pick their teams, their players to support. Um, and I also mentioned before the break, sometimes it could be just, if it's like, let's say the World Cup, it might be the country that you're from. So that's pretty simple and it's not a lot of choice there. It's just kind of part of your identity or your background, the country you live in or you came from. So you support them. But oftentimes it's more of a choice when we talk about, teams. Sometimes, yes, it could be the team from the city you're from, but even sometimes within a city, there's more than one team. So there's some kind of choice involved. As as is the case with lots of parts of our identity, we might feel like we're choosing it completely on our own, but it's kind of a symbiotic process of, the people around us, but especially your family and closest people to us. So a lot of people say, I support this team because my parents and my dad and grandfather, grandma, whoever supported this team, and so it's just part of the family, and so we're surrounded by this club, and now I support them too, and it becomes part of your identity. It feels very close, so it's not just something that was there. Over time, it gets internalized, and now it is part of you too. So there's some level of choice there, we could say. Sometimes you just see these families where, everyone is a Lakers fan, but then there's one son who's like the Clippers fan, or everyone is a Liverpool fan, and then the daughter wants to be an Everton fan, two teams in the same city where you might go against the family. And of course, that could be related to a lot of psychological things, maybe some rebellion or trying to be antagonistic or contrarian or whatever it is, or maybe just somehow you connected to them. I've even heard stories of people just like, oh, I liked the colors of this team way back when, and then I started watching them and now I support them. Or maybe it was some player on that team, watching them play that connected you to that team, and then, that changed. But as I say, for a lot of people, it's almost given at some level, whether it's the nation or the city you live in or your family. But often there is some sense of choice there. And I think that can always be interesting. I can look at myself, looking at what teams, players were you drawn towards. I've seen some people post things about Messi versus Ronaldo. This is like I wouldn't say oldest, but old as it has been maybe 15 years plus of people debating who's better, and also who's the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time, if it's one of these two. But it's a constant, question. You can just ask Messi or Ronaldo. It's just a question you can ask and see what people answer. I've seen some posts on looking at the differences psychologically between Messi and Ronaldo fans, and I think it's still probably very preliminary in its survey and all those kinds of things. But they said maybe found some differences. More liberal is more likely to be a Messi fan versus conservative, more likely to be a Ronaldo fan, and some other factors like that. But I don't know how reliable or valid the research is. But nonetheless, I do think it can make sense to try to understand why might someone pick a certain player or team. And I do think you might get drawn to certain things that likely either remind you of yourself or maybe what you want to be. So it can be both. I think there's some kind of identity. When you talk about that, you might identify already with a player or team for some reason of how they might remind you of who you are, who you want to be. So I've noticed, for example, in different sports, I became a fan of Peyton Manning in American football now a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, more than that. And he was known as being a very intellectual player, kind of he was skilled and strong in lots of ways, but really was more with his mind that he was very good studying tape and understanding what the other team wanted to do and adjusting to that. And I remember really being drawn to that factor. And that could make sense. Even when I played sports, obviously never professionally or at a very high level, but still when I played, let's say basketball, I was never very tall or fast, or that wasn't the way that I would ever get to play well. It was more I had to be skilled and try to play smart. And so I could see that I tended to be drawn to players like that, not the most physically dominant, but the one that was kind of a bit smarter and skilled, because I think I could relate to that more. That wasn't always the case. Sometimes there's other players I like, but there definitely was that tendency. When I look at Messi versus Ronaldo, and it's maybe 15 years ago that I went towards Messi and started following him. And as I was talking about, these things can evolve. So at first it was like, oh, it's fun to watch him play. I like watching him play. I like him. And now where I get affected by if he wins or loses, which could sound a bit crazy. I can understand, but that's the way it is. That's how sports can affect us, or these themes that I've been talking about today. But even back then, yeah, when you look at Messi or Ronaldo, I can get that. Messi is more, I'm going to say like me, like I like him, but some of the traits are more like me. I kind of prefer the more soft-spoken, kind of, at least humble. Maybe some people argue about, is he humble or not, but at least in persona or how he presents himself. Physically, not the most overwhelming. He's actually quite short and small. And so I get that now, that it makes sense. I remember I didn't think about these things when I was, chose him, if you want to say, over Ronaldo way back then. I picked him as a player to follow and support. But, I could get that Ronaldo is less like still me or my characteristics, like more confident or cocky, even arrogant, kind of makes it about himself. I'm biased, so you might hear some of that in how I described both of them. But to me, it does make sense that Messi was the one that I was drawn towards. So you might notice that in yourself, or you might notice people picking a favorite player or who they prefer. There often is something there that will make sense when you understand their own personality or psyche. It kind of reminds me when people say, oh, people tend to look like their dogs. And to me, it's not because they start to look like each other, but that people tend to pick a dog that aligns with their personality in some way. So that kind of a soft, fluffy person might pick a more soft, fluffy dog, and a more tough guy or girl might pick a tougher looking dog. And so it just kind of matches them, not just kind of some magic or they change over time, but because of that. And so similarly, I think when you look at who people support, you often will see these certain themes where people might choose someone similar to them or who reflects their personality more. One, because we're going to be drawn to that. And then it can make sense even more with the identification, the social identification theory, that, I can relate more to a player that is kind of more like me in some ways, or who I think is more like me, and a player who isn't like me. So I think that can totally make sense. So often it's that also their style of play might be something that you like. Usually they're just good players, but it's interesting how you can be drawn to someone. And going back to this Messi versus Ronaldo thing, I think it's interesting. And if you're online at all and look at any kind of sports content, you'll see so many just posts and debates and comments, and this is definitive proof of this, or this is that, or just a whole bunch of things. And I've seen a ton of that stuff. I find it interesting how people will discuss who they like or prefer, or who they support, and how these things evolve. As I said, I became a Messi fan way back in maybe, 2010 or 2009. I don't know exactly what it was, a while ago now. And he was fairly early in his career. He'd already accomplished a lot, but fairly early in his career. And I do think he's the best of all time and better than Ronaldo, but of course there's biases there. But I think that's what I want to talk about, is how people make these determinations as if they're arguments. Really, it was just their preference. So, back in 2009, 2010, I liked Messi more. Now, I didn't know how his career would play out, but I preferred him. I supported him, and I started to connect with him. But it didn't mean I knew how his career would pan out, or that it would necessarily be better or worse or different from Ronaldo's or anyone else's. That's just who I supported. I think when people then have these debates, they kind of get caught up in this, now I have to support who I liked more. But it's really, you just liked him more. That, to me, that's what it really is. You might try to prove why they're better or worse. And, we can get that if we identify with them. We want them to win. If we identify with them, we can get a sense of superiority if they are the best ever, and we supported the best ever and feel connected to a part of that. But I think these debates, people, as is usually the case, they don't change their mind even with new information. So things happen. One player could do better or worse over a period of time, but they tend to stick to what they already felt, because it's not about just the result. It's that they liked the player more. I think most people wouldn't want to say that I just like this person more. They want to say, no, he's better than him, or she's better than this other player. But usually I think that's what it is about. It's just, I've always liked this player, and I'm happy when, let's say, he wins, just like I am with Messi, but not because he is best or had to have been the best. He could have not had a good career. Things could have gone a whole bunch of ways. And actually, that's another thing about sports that, of course, hard work, talent, dedication, all these factors impact the player's success, absolutely. But there's also luck involved. If you've watched enough sports, you see things kind of go. Sometimes go your way, sometimes they don't. Or a call goes in your direction, or it doesn't, or something kind of lucky might happen in your favor or against you, or something that costs you, or another player makes a huge mistake, or another player does something really great, and now you win because of them, and you might get a lot of credit or be remembered as a winner, but maybe you weren't even the one that made things happen or made the difference, or was the point of difference. That's just how it is. And so, if I read about the history of sports and I see, the 1960s, this team won and this team did this, you just take it as some kind of given, like it had to be that way. But when you watch sports, you see how thin the margins are, how much luck is involved, how much things can change, in a way that's not necessarily related to one team or one player being better or worse than the others. How, you can have a good day and a bad day, and sometimes they just happen to match up, and the worst team might win sometimes. So it's a lot of things that go into it. But I do find these debates quite fascinating, that people can get so passionate about, proving that their player, their team is better. But I think oftentimes really it's a matter of preference. You like this player more. Now you can then discuss those things. But I think what you usually see is the same person supporting the same player, even when, new results come in. And to me, that's just a sign that it's not about it trying to get to some truth. It's more about trying to win, and in this case, win by showing that you're better than the others. We are better than them. I am better than you, because that feels good. It feels good to feel that way, obviously. So we want that kind of a thing. So I always find these debates interesting. I've gone caught up in them too, even before with Kobe and other players, and comparing them. We see it happening all the time, and some of it I think it's. There is no definitive answer, which is kind of frustrating, but I think that's what also makes it fun, because the debate never ends in that way. You can always go back and forth, or there's different perspectives, or, well, there's also this side, or I think this is most important, or whatever it is. It's interesting. You learn different things. I think that's why people like these types of debates, is that you can just go on, and everyone can have their own opinion. But it isn't just like something of like who has the most of something, the highest number, or something very clear and tangible. It's much more nuanced than that. I do think it's interesting, when you like a player or a team, it can sometimes automatically make you dislike another player or team. So maybe if you watch sports or follow sports online, you'll hear about people talk about hate watch. So let's say if you're a Messi fan, if you watch Ronaldo or Portugal or one of his clubs play when he's playing for them, we'll call it a hate watch, that you're watching, hoping he plays bad and they lose. And it's kind of a funny term, but that happens. And I think it's actually kind of sad, and I've experienced this myself, that because of this Messi Ronaldo debate and rivalry, a lot of times I'm hoping Ronaldo doesn't do well, and so he's a very talented player and has an incredible career. And so it can almost be sad that rather than just enjoying his greatness or, the things that he's doing, I'm almost hoping for things to go bad because of this rivalry, because I want to win and make sure that Messi is better. As I was saying, it's like I just prefer him, but let's see what results happen. But, you just kind of get caught up in that whole thing. And rather than just enjoy who's doing well, you get caught up in, winning and losing, because your identity feels like it's on the line. And how good you are feels it's on the line, even though, again, it almost is a joke to think that because you're not playing, but it could feel that way. I've even noticed that as much as I love cheering for a team and caring about it, and it creates these intense emotions, of course, lots of pain and, those kinds of feelings, but also the great feeling of winning. There's something more comforting at times watching a big game, but of two teams you don't really care about, because you can just enjoy the game and not worry about, wanting the results to go one way or the other, especially when you have no control over what happens. That's what I might talk about, related to things like superstition later on the show as well. But let's go to the commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. On the show today, I've been talking about different aspects of being a sports fan, so the psychology behind it, how intensely it might feel about it's just a game and a game not even being played by us, and how it can almost seem puzzling at times. But if you experienced it and felt it, you know how strong those emotions can actually be. And I could definitely relate to that. I was talking in this last segment about how we might choose the player or the team that we support and how it might relate or be reflective of parts of ourselves, aspects of ourselves, um, which I think could be interesting to look at. So you can look at what teams you like or don't like, or and how that might be uh, consistent or relate to who you are, parts of yourself, parts of how you see yourself or how you want to see yourself. I'm actually sitting here. I can see on my desk my a Liverpool cap, and I haven't been a fan of Liverpool Football Club for a long time, but what really drew me to them was a sense of community, of this connection, of working hard, of we more than I, or we more than me. So I'm working for the team. And being there, actually, I've had the privilege of being there at Enfield and watching Liverpool games and seeing the crowd and the way they sing and they clap and cheer and togetherness and unity, singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." I felt a beautiful connection with that, and now it's internalized and become more and more part of my identity or another aspect of it. Our identity is multifaceted, so I'm just looking at that and I can see how to maybe think of that, just like what makes connect to a team or a player, and that's another one for me. But what I was also thinking is how we support the team, how we support the player, could also give us some insights into ourselves. There's a cliche statement of how you do something or how you do anything is how you do everything. And I tend to dislike these kind of absolute, short and sweet, or trying to be too short and sweet, because I think it usually hides the complexity of things. Because yes, there's a lot of truth to that. How you do something is how you do it. How you do anything is how you do everything. Yes and no. Of course, there could be something to the fact that uh, there can be tendencies we have, or how we do something is likely to be similar. If we might do something else that might seem unrelated. So I think that's important to keep in mind. But it's also not true, because then, if I see you do one thing, then I know everything about you and who you are in every way. Of course not. We are complex. So there's more truth than that. But yeah, I do think there's something to the point that, you can learn a lot about yourself from even seeing something in an area that's different from the one you might want to even look at, because there are going to be these tendencies we have or ways that we do things. And so I've also noticed myself, and I've seen other people, that the way that they support, the ways they think about um, the player, the team, it can definitely be impacted by their psychology and how they see themselves. So I can give you a personal example to demonstrate that. So I mentioned being a Messi fan. I remember watching some of his matches, and I would kind of see him have a chance, and he would kind of miss it, or make a bad pass or lose the ball a few times, and I'm like, gosh, I can't believe he did that, or that was a big mistake, or he should have scored a goal on that opportunity. That was a good chance, or made a better pass, or whatever it was. I remember just being kind of hard on him. Really, experienced that he had a bad game. He could have done so much better, and leave the game feeling like he did bad. And then I'd hear the commentators after the game talking about, Messi was amazing. He was so good, spectacular, best player in the world. All those things that it would kind of hit me, and it kind of made me become aware of this tendency that I can be so hard on myself and so perfectionistic that if I make a mistake, or if I do something wrong, I could do so many other things right in the same event or same, whatever it is that we're talking about. But I could be very fixated on those mistakes, or even one mistake, and it can make me feel like I did bad overall. And so that was eye opening for me, that I would think he had a bad game, because I would pay attention to those mistakes rather than focusing on the bigger picture, seeing all the things he did right, or recognizing that, even when you have a good game, it doesn't mean you literally did every single thing perfectly, but it means you did a lot of things really well, and that's more than good enough, or it can be very good. So that was interesting. And so I recognize how bad it is to be so hard on yourself, and how I could do that, that I could miss, and I probably am missing the good in myself at times where I think I'm doing a lot worse than I am. And as I was saying, we can learn a lot about ourselves through sports, like through anything. And so that made me recognize that. And so I started to notice that trend a lot, that I would see a player, if I really liked them, I would be so hard on, them. But then if I saw the rival, I wouldn't have that same. I would be, look, they did this really well, and I would focus on the good. And so I was discounting their bad and amplifying their good, and doing the reverse with my player, which means myself. So going back to that type of social identity, or identifying with the player or the team, we can treat them the way we treat ourselves as well. And I think that's interesting. And you might notice some things about yourself, or maybe you'll just focus on the good. You can also do it the other way. It's not always a good thing. Yes, we want to not be too hard on ourselves, and we want to try to be positive with ourselves and all of that, encourage, but we can also ignore the mistakes and not grow from them or learn from them either. So you might be too far on that end of the spectrum. So that to me is very eye-opening, and I've seen it with Messi, with other players as well, or teams, that I've kind of can be too hard on them, and makes me realize, wow, I could be too hard on me, because I see them as me, as an extension of me. So I do treat them the way I could treat myself. And sometimes with our own performance or what we do, we don't really have this kind of clear feedback. We don't have commentators watching what we're doing, or analysts looking over the data points to get this kind of feedback. But having these multiple examples where I thought he did bad, or didn't have a good game. Even I remember one in particular where I thought he had a bad game, and then the player, the announcers after the game, one of them was like, "I have one word," and he'd written down Messi and held it up in front of the screen. I was like, "Oh." And then he talked like how he's the best in the world, and he played like the best in the world. And so it was really, really eye-opening for me. And it took me even some time after seeing that for it to really click that, oh, it's because I'm so hard on myself that I can be so hard on him. I identify him as me. I can't keep the ball at all, but I see him as me, and I treat him as me. And that was very, very eye-opening, and something that did allow me to learn about myself, and something that I continue to try to work on, to not be hard on myself, and to give myself the benefit of the doubt, and realize that even when I make mistakes, it doesn't mean I'm bad or doing bad or not good. It just that's part of being human. And that's another thing that sports can teach us, is that you don't have to be perfect to be even the best, let alone be good. Almost in every sport, people that are even good at whatever we're talking about, they make lots of mistakes. If you're talking about shooting a three-pointer, usually the average percentage is, not the average, the top percentage is going to be under 50%, meaning that you miss more than you make, but yet you are the best at it, that year. And in baseball, they famously say, if you, get a hit 3 out of 10 times, you'd be batting 300, and that'd be very good. So that means 7 times out of 10, you're bad. You're striking out, or you're not getting on base, and you're going out. Only 3 out of 10 times you can do well, and that means you're doing great. So I think that's another lesson we can see from sports, that perfection is not even possible, but not even needed. And it's you make mistakes, or you won't always win or succeed, but that doesn't matter. The important thing is to keep going, keep trying, to not give up. So to not be so hard on yourself, because the harder you are on yourself when you do make a mistake or have a miss, the harder it will be for you to recover and then to do well. If you're still thinking about the last miss, you're less likely to make the next shot, or maybe even to take the next shot. You might be afraid to take the next shot because you missed the last one. So we see that the best athletes, the top performers, they're able to bounce back from setbacks and mistakes and getting it wrong, and they don't hold on to it for too long. They have, as they sometimes will say, they have a short memory. They'll just kind of, something will happen, and then they move on to the next, and they want that next opportunity. And so I think that can be an important thing for all of us to learn. For me in particular, when I'm watching or thinking about that, you'll get it wrong, you'll make mistakes. That doesn't mean you're bad, or it doesn't mean you're not good. It doesn't mean you're even not doing well in that performance or whatever it is we're talking about. It's just part of doing anything, that you'll sometimes, or whatever it is we're doing, you won't do it perfectly, and that's to be expected. That's very much just the way it is. So that's been interesting for me. Also, being anxious about outcomes is something I've noticed about myself. So, and not wanting to get my hopes up. That's two more kind of related things. So, anxious about outcomes, kind of worried things can go bad. And so because of that, I'm regularly notice, and this kind of relates to the being hard on myself, that I kind of will think sometimes that other teams are stronger than they are, and my team isn't as strong. So going into a game, I'm like, I don't know how strong we are. Saying that with we, I think that other team is very, very strong. So it'd be kind of hard on myself, and because of that, be very anxious or even negative or pessimistic about the outcome. I'm if we're going to win, we're going to lose. I think they're much better than us. And so I've noticed that tendency to go in that direction. And again, some people might be the other way. They might be overconfident. Oh, we're so much better, and that other team is not even good. And that could be unhealthy too, to another extreme. We always want to see things as they are as much as possible. And I mentioned related to this, not getting your hopes up. I've noticed this about myself in general, the sense of being almost afraid to get my hopes up. Like even if it seems like something's going to happen, not letting myself get too happy or excited about it till it actually happens or is for sure or confirmed, even past the degree that I should have to wait for. But I've noticed that tendency in myself. And the same thing can happen in sports, where even if my team is winning by a lot, with a little bit of time left, at times I can still feel nervous until the very end. When maybe, yes, you don't want to assume you've won. You don't want to take your eye off the prize or just, take it easy too much, because you might let the other team back into it. But sometimes you can realize that your victory is close, and you don't have to be so stressed. That stress actually obviously can backfire too. So I've noticed that about myself, this kind of afraid to get my hopes up in a game, or thinking, okay, even if we're up by 5 points and there's like 3 seconds left, I still have to wait till it ends, or just like see what happens before I can feel calm or feel secure about the victory. And I've noticed that about life in general, this tendency to not be, afraid to get my hopes up, or afraid till I get the confirmation of things to a degree that is more than is needed. Again, you don't want to, as the saying goes, put all your eggs in one basket, or assume you already know the outcome, or count your chickens before they hatch, or whatever. And sayings are related to eggs and things, but not to get too ahead of yourself or assume you've already won. But we also can allow ourselves to enjoy things when it seems very clear they're happening, and we don't always get 100% confirmation of things, and so we have to let ourselves enjoy it at times. So just sharing some things I've noticed about myself. I'm sure there's many others. Many others even I have noticed that I might not get into right now, but also many others that I haven't even noticed. And if I continue to reflect on myself, might become more apparent. But those are some themes. And, you kind of, as I was saying, as you put them all together, can get more of a sense of yourself. Like, oh, yeah, I have this tendency. And as has come up time and time again today, we identify with the players and the teams that we support. So, they become us, we become them. We can see them the way we see ourselves. We can pick players or teams that somehow we think or, reflect who we are, how we'd like to be, and who we'd like to be. And then because of that, we might treat them the way we treat ourselves, or, kind of act as them, or, the way we might act with ourselves. So kind of, as I'm saying, be too hard on them as we are too hard on ourselves, and other things like that. So you might notice certain patterns in yourself if you follow sports closely and really care about sports. Who are the teams and players you like? How did you choose them? How might that reflect something about you? But then also, how you treat them, or feel about them, feel about the games will likely reflect some things about you that you might not notice, because you just think that's just how you feel about the games, or, oh, we won or we lost, this happened. But sometimes when you especially talk to other people, or you get some contradictions, like I was saying, you think the player did bad, but the media is all saying he actually did very good, or he had a good game. You start to realize, like, oh, maybe, there's something here in understanding myself a little bit better. So let's go into our last commercial break. In the last segment, I think I'd like to talk about just showing up to play, or, trying our best, because sometimes that's all that is in our control, whether it's in sports or in life. So I'll conclude this conversation on sports with that topic. Let's go to our last commercial break. We'll be right back. Segment, as I talk about sports throughout the show, being a sports fan, that experience. And I mentioned that sports can teach us lots of lessons about ourselves, about life in general. I want to conclude I'm talking about one of those. So, as I mentioned a few times already today, and in other shows as well, I'm a big fan of Messi for maybe 15 plus years now. And yeah, I can even look back at those early years, those saying, connecting to him, enjoying him watching play. Like, wow, this guy's so good. But then over time, feeling the ups and downs more with him. When he would win, feeling good, and when he would lose, feeling bad. Following whether from Barcelona to Paris, and even now to Inter Miami, and then also supporting him on the national team. Um, and he's had a lot of ups and downs, as anyone does in sports. Even if you're very good, you have lots of failures as well, between the successes. And I mentioned this before the break. What I wanted to talk about as a lesson to learn is just showing up, taking action, doing your best. Because that's all we can control. We can't always control or we can't control the outcome most of the time. All we can do is make sure we show up and do our best. Work hard, and that's it. Then we have to see what the result is and live with that. Because when you look at this World Cup, I mean, first of all, just showing up, I think at 39, he turned 39 during the third tournament. He was 38 when I first started. But at that age, I'll be honest, even as a big Messi fan, I didn't expect too much from him. He's been playing in the MLS in America for a couple of years, so he doesn't really turn it on that much. And yeah, he sometimes has some moments of magic, but we also know that the competition is not nearly at the level of let's say the top teams in Europe. And on an international stage, we weren't sure. I wasn't sure what he can do. 2 years ago at the Copa America, it does seem like he had an injury that then got exacerbated in the final, but he didn't look good at all. So to be honest, I watched the whole tournament, watched their games, and he didn't look great. So I thought maybe that's it. He kind of has done some incredible things. And definitely when this World Cup was rolling around, I was hoping Argentina would do well, but definitely did not have super high expectations of what Messi could do. And then he exceeded all of those, by far. Started off with a hat trick, 3 goals in the first game, then 2 goals, and then didn't play much in the last game, but still scored a goal of the group stage. And so he was really, looking great. And so I also heard him talk about how he was working out twice a day for months, trying to get ready and make sure he was in the best possible condition for this World Cup. So that's the working hard part. And a narrative that's always been there about Messi is that he's just naturally gifted and naturally talented. And he does seem to clearly have some, incredible just natural abilities and talents. That's there. And even you can watch highlights of him playing when he's a young kid, and you see that there's something special there. But this does seem to be a myth that it's just all pure natural genius, and he doesn't have to work hard, or didn't have to work hard. And when you talk to people who know soccer, know football, they say no one actually who plays would ever think this about him or anyone at his level, especially to be good as long as he's been. That there has to be crazy amounts of hard work involved to get there. So, that's the hard work part, that even, and this myth that we're just going to be good at something, or that there's these geniuses that are just good and don't have to try, it really is a myth. We sometimes prefer that myth because it lets us off the hook. If there are people that are just incredibly gifted at something, and those are the ones that do well, and all of us are just destined not for greatness, that lets us off the hook that we don't have to try hard. But when we realize that no, even those people who achieve big things, yes, they likely had some natural talent, but they had to work very, very hard to achieve the things that they did. Now it makes us realize, like, well, am I working as hard as I can with whatever abilities that I have? And usually the answer is no, and we can work harder. So we don't want to just let ourselves off the hook. So I think it's a reminder that we need to work hard, and we can, and we owe it to ourselves and those around us to work hard, to do the best that we can, and to be the best version of ourselves, and to perform at the best level that we can, whatever that type of performance is that we are talking about. And yeah, he definitely worked hard, and he showed up. A lot of people thought, well, he won the last World Cup. Surely that's his last World Cup. What else does he have to prove? He's already achieved it all. But he wanted to keep competing, or keep fighting and fighting with his compatriots, and to go for more. And I could definitely respect that. And as I said, I don't think anyone expected the level that we saw from him, and what he displayed. I think I also learned from this. It's still something I'm processing with, like I said, the pain of the final, not going the way it wanted. Is that things don't always go the way you want them to, or things can feel destined, or it has to go a certain way, but it doesn't always go like that. Argentina struggled along the way, and yes, there's controversy, and I've seen so many things of conspiracy theories from during the tournament to get them to the final, and now conspiracies of they lost the final, or they had to lose the final, or were forced to, and all this stuff, which I don't buy into at all. Um, but you have to just show up and try your best, as I was saying before. And sometimes things can seem destined to go well, and they might not. So every step along the way, basically every game, it looked like they were going to lose or close to losing, from Cape Verde to Egypt being down 2-0, um, to Switzerland, getting so close to the end of extra time and finally winning, and then to England being down 1-0 in the 85th minute still, and then winning, this amazing comeback. And so it just kind of felt like it was destined that it was going to be this fairy tale storybook ending for Messi here in Argentina, and they were going to win the final. Being the kind of fan I am, as I told you before, I actually did not have those expectations going to the final. I thought Spain looked like the better team. Unfortunately, I think they're going to win. I think Argentina has overperformed and overachieved based on their talent. And I think yes, maybe some people say things going their way, but also I think Messi being incredible, and also just this team being a band of brothers that, always believed they could still win. Were fighting for each other and would really fight hard to try to win. But I really thought that Argentina overachieved. I think England probably is a better team than them, but they didn't win. They didn't beat them. That's the beautiful thing about sports. It doesn't matter who's better on paper. You have to go out on the field and perform it and see who wins. But so it wasn't a storybook ending, for Messi. And as I said, I'm still not totally at terms with this. It still hurts to think about. But I think that's also a good lesson in life, that you can't control the outcome, and things won't always go your way. You want it so much. It seems like it's going to happen. Maybe it seems like it should happen in some way, but it doesn't always happen. And all you can do is work hard and do your best, and to make sure you show up, make sure you do the thing, whatever it is. Most of us don't live a life like in a soccer player, where there are these clear set events, like the Copa America or the Euros or the World Cup, and it's very circumscribed kind of a thing. For most of us in our lives, we have to really create the competition, or the event, whatever that is. And that could be harder in a lot of ways, because it's not set, made, and something we have to just go and do. We have to create it, which means that the showing up part means even creating what it is to show up to, whatever that is. And I think almost all of us in our lives can see there are a lot of things that we can do that we never do, or we never get started on, or we think about getting started and we never do. So now I thought about before I did this show in particular, but in general, it's this theme. So you look at our life, we're like, okay, there's so many of these World Cups that I never started for myself, types of projects, events, things that we can do that we didn't even start. We can't have a success or have something go well unless we start. And that's one of the biggest challenges of life, I think, is just showing up or just making it happen. Sometimes it's just showing up, like, you go support a friend and you just go to the event or go to their house if they're going through a hard time or whatever it is. But a lot of times it's creating something yourself. And I think that's really difficult for a lot of us to have that initiative. So I think just showing up is important. And, I was inspired by Messi that he just even showed up to this tournament, the way he did, and prepared himself, which relates to working hard. So, yes, showing up is often the hardest part, but make sure you do your best in whatever that is, meaning you prepare yourself for it, and then you work as hard as you can. So, he's training for months, and of course, all the players were. So I'm not just saying he was the only one, but being my favorite player, he's the one I'm focusing on. But he prepared before in whatever ways he could, physically and mentally and all that. And then he showed up. And so for yourself, what does that look like? preparing yourself for whatever it is that you is your World Cup, whether that's being a parent, whether that's something in your career, something creatively, whatever that is. Are you doing everything you can to prepare for yourself to do the best that you can for yourself or whoever else is involved? Because we all have these our World Cups, even if they're not seen by the rest of the world or seen by billions of people. Um, they're seen by us and the people closest to us, and will be impacting those people closest to us. So if you're a parent, obviously your kid or kids, will be impacted by how you parent, and also whoever you're parenting with. And your career, your family will be impacted, and also whatever it is that you can do in your career, what you might create, and the people whose lives will be touched by that. So I think the showing up piece and preparing is something very important that we can learn from sports. And actually, I've always thought, and there are some shows, and you see clips online that demonstrate this, but we all love watching the games and watching those moments of excitement and brilliance and all of that. But I always thought, especially for the younger generation, but for all of us, that could be more and more coverage of the training and the preparation, because you might just see the players show up on the field and have an amazing game or do something incredible. But go back to this notion of it's not just like natural talent or just they have it and that's the gift that they have and how they're displaying it. It's almost always from tireless hours and hours and hours of preparation physically, watching film, training with different types of staff, from coaches to physical coaches or trainers and things like that. It doesn't just happen overnight or by accident. So I always thought that it'd be good to show more of that, of how much hard work and dedication goes into performing at this level. It's not just, these gifted athletes that naturally perform like that, because that could be good for all of us to realize that, it's going to be for more hard work that we do good things. And even if it is, I've said it a few times, this example of being a parent, for example. Yeah, that's your World Cup. That's going to be where you need to step up and do the best that you can. Make sure you prepare in all the ways you can. Make sure you keep working hard at it, in whatever ways that you can, because that you have to do the best that you can do. And that's what you should do. So I appreciate that, those things that you could in sports. And even I was inspired by Messi in this World Cup of working hard, preparing, showing up, doing your best. But as I was mentioning, things don't always end the way you want them to. And I think that's good to keep in mind. Sometimes like we have, it's the fairy tale, in every movie, the person works so hard, tries their best, and it goes the way they want it to go. And that feels really good. But the truth is, in life, a lot of times things don't go the way you want them to do, want them to go. You might try your best, you might prepare, you might do everything right. You might do it to the best that you possibly can do it. And still, it's just not good enough, or you just don't make it, or things don't go your way, or even something unfair can happen, it's not even that you should have lost it or shouldn't have gotten, let's say, the promotion or whatever it is that we're talking about. Things don't always go your way. And that can be tough. And sometimes it almost make you feel like maybe it was better I didn't even show up. Why did I even do this? And I've even seen people say that maybe Messi shouldn't have played this World Cup. Look at how bad, the final went, and he didn't look good in the final, and maybe all that. And yeah, I can get that. I think it's also something else I've talked about in sports. When you look at things like Michael Jordan's record in the finals, where we can be so obsessed with perfection that when we see that blemish or something bad, we can think that, it would be better not to do it at all than to lose or to not get it right. But as painful as it is, as much as I wish it went differently, there could be a real beauty in that, and just showing up. Because when you show up, there's no guarantee you win. Showing up, yes, this could be the hard part. It could be difficult. Most of us don't do it enough. But it doesn't mean if you show up, you just are guaranteed victory or things will go well. A lot of times when you show up, it still doesn't go well. But that doesn't mean showing up was wrong. You still have to give yourself the best opportunity, or even just the opportunity for something to happen. But it doesn't always go the way you want. And that's a bitter pill to swallow, but a true one about life. As they say, you win some, you lose some. I think that's another experience you have as a sports fan that can be tough. And really, it can only feel good if the losses also feel bad. And what that means is that if you care about whatever it is that you're doing, you'll feel really good if it works out, and you'll feel bad if it doesn't. And I think it's important for us to create things in our life that we do care about. That when they go well, it feels good. And when it doesn't, it's not going to feel good. That's how you know you're doing something that matters to you. But that means you have to deal with that good and that bad and those emotions that come with it. So, as I mentioned at the start of the show, there are things way more important than sports when it comes to life. Absolutely. Um, but there are things we can also learn about life through sports, which is some of what I tried to talk about today. And World Cup's over. We'll have to wait another 4 years for the next one. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure a lot of you did too, enjoying all the countries compete, the competition, the beautiful moments, the fun, and all that. And just some thoughts on sports psychology, being a sports fan, and my own personal experience within all of that. Well, that brings us to the end of today's show. Big thank you to Farid in the studio. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee, Free Iran.